Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session on building custom functions in Excel. I'm going to give it just another few seconds before we get started, just to let people that are coming directly from another meeting. I know what that's like. That's most of my day, especially these days. So we will let's give it about 20, 30 more seconds. This is going to be recorded, so in case somebody comes a little bit late, they can catch up. And in case you want to review this, you will also have access to that. So I will probably put it on YouTube. Let's see here. All right, I got about 1 o'clock and some change, almost 1:01 Central Time. So go ahead and get started here. Give you a little bit about my background, and then we'll get into today's content, go through the agenda. First of all, I like to start out a little different. I like to share who I'm not. I have a relatively famous name, especially if you were a football fan. You probably know that. I'm not the Derrick Henry that won the Heisman Trophy at Alabama and is currently the running back for the Baltimore Ravens. Fun fact, I went to school at Texas A&M, and when we joined the SEC, which is the same conference that Alabama has been in forever, he would run all over my team, and I'm like, it's kind of cool hearing my name, but not for the other team. So I'm not him, but I'm also not a convicted felon. When I volunteered or came in to volunteer at my wife's school, gosh, this is like 15 years ago. You give the lady the idea, they do a quick background check, and then they, either let you in or not. Well, she put it in, kind of freaked out for just a moment because a picture of a guy came up that kind of looked like maybe a second or third cousin, same hair color, vaguely resemble me. And he was a felon in Washington, and I hadn't been to Washington state yet. So I'm like, well, no, that's not me. So in the spectrum of people you want to know, I'm probably somewhere right in the middle. So if I'm not those guys, who am I? Well, by day, I'm a solutions consultant at a company called OneStream. So when it comes to financial reporting and planning and consolidations and close management, and of course, really, really cool functionality that works well with Excel, that's what I do. I do demonstrations, lead trainings, technical conversations, kind of sort of like what we're doing right now. I also do things on the side with a company called Excelevator. I'm an Excel nut, hence the Christmas ugly sweater that you're seeing kind of right here. It's one of my wife's least favorite things in my closet, but I'm allowed a few of those. So I do trainings like this. I build a lot of really cool tools. You'll see a couple of those today because it's very relevant what we're talking about. Do consulting projects here and there. And I guess that's kind of covered at the bottom there. Like I said, went to Texas A&M, did programs in accounting and IT, and now I help support accounting software sales. So who'd have thunk that was that relevant? And that was after starting in audit for 5 years, controllership and similar roles for 11 years, etc. And of course, all along the way, I've been relatively obsessed with Excel. And the challenge that I've always had is to make things as automated as possible because I'm kind of lazy, right? I don't really want to be doing things multiple times. And what we'll talk about today is one of the newer approaches I'm taking to do that. Personal perspective, I'm in the Arlington, Texas area, so very close to where the Cowboys and Rangers play. They're about 12 minutes to my northeast-ish, east-northeast. I've got a couple of daughters. One's in 7th grade. One's about to graduate and go to OU as an Aggie. I'm like, okay. They're pretty cool people, though. They've been very, very accommodating despite that. And I got a couple of golden doodles. You might see one roam around back here in the blurred background. We're heavily involved at church, and I love to play disc golf and softball. And in my core values, I like to share these. We actually did a training on the power of core values from a biblical perspective on Wednesday. Hospitality, efficiency, accountability, resourcefulness, and tenacity. And what accountant doesn't love a good acronym? So that is heart when you put them all together. And that came from an interview question I got a while back. Describe yourself in just one word. It used to be resourceful. And now I kind of cheat a little bit and I say heart. And then I let them know it's not just, it's like 6 words in one. So that's a little bit about me. Now, some of you are here for CPE. That's totally fine. I love a good free CPE. As a CPA, I have to get those too. I'm actually done for the year, which is a first. To be able to participate, just make sure you answer at least 3 polling questions. Now, how this is going to work is there's going to be live polling when you take a picture of this QR code with your camera. It should pop up. The poll everywhere is the application I use for that. When you do that, please put in something I can tie to your name that goes along with the registration. So it could be an email address, initials if you just wanted to, something like that. Because by default, it says guest something, and then I have no idea who the credits should go to. So if you could do that for me, that would be amazing. We will get started with that, well, right now. The QR code is also up here at the top right if you're seeing that. I'm also full of humor. And I like to share dad jokes. I found that with meetings, especially with demos, it really just makes it a little bit more engaging. Sometimes I threaten people if they're not really asking a lot of questions or responding to my questions. I'll be like, well, I've got plenty of dad jokes. I can share one or threaten you with it, or I can, just reward them with more if they're being really good. So make sure that you are using one of those. I'm going to make sure it's working because I'm not seeing any results yet. And usually it's pretty instant. So let me make sure that it's working on my end too. Okay, so it works for me. If anybody's struggling with that, getting a question answered there, I'll give you just a little bit more time on this first one since it's when you first log in. I know this seems kind of random putting cows in there, but for some reason, a lot of the jokes I've accumulated over the years are cows. And with a grandfather who did animal science as a professor at San Angelo State University and an uncle that does ranching, those are very familiar to me. So if you're struggling with that, let me know. You can use the Q&A and we can check that. But I'll share one here that I really like about cows. Let's see. What do you get when you cross a cow and a Smurf? You get blue cheese. It's one of many of these that I have in my database is what I call it. All right, so we're going to move on here, get to the agenda, and get started with the content. Why is my mouse is not wanting to go to the next slide? Something with the polling software here. Let's go down here. There we go. Okay, so the agenda for today, we're going to touch on the importance of LAMBDA. LAMBDA is the newest approach that helps you do custom Excel functions, okay? We're going to look through a few examples of those in play and help you understand even more about how they can be helpful and how you can set them up and use them. We're going to compare that to the legacy approach up until about 5 years ago. You could build custom functions, but you had to have a macro-enabled file. And then that was a lot of reasons why some people didn't really use them. They were either scared of it or they didn't want to have to save it in a macro-enabled file or whatever. And this just gives you multiple approaches. That approach still does work. And there are reasons why you might use that instead of this newer approach with LAMBDA. Sometimes they even work really well together. And then we'll wrap up with some tools for success as you embark on trying to use this powerful tool. I really hope that you plan on doing that because it has saved me a lot of time. It's kind of an obsession. In fact, all of next year, I'm going to be doing a series called LAMBDA of the Week. I have my good friend right here. I've got a little pet LAMBDA that my kids got for me, or pet lamb, not LAMBDA. I've named it Cotton. I know that's funny. And we're going to do an example every single week, kind of helping people understand one. Most of them are pretty simple, but it's like, oh, this is quicker than typing out an entire formula with several different functions. So be on the lookout for that. Now, the workbook I'm going to go through, if you want a copy of that, you can download it using the QR code that you're seeing right here. It should take you to the page where you can see that, download it, and follow along if you want. We'll leave that up for just a moment. It'll also be in the recap for you guys whenever we are done here. All right. Now, importance. I like to separate the sections when I do a presentation with a meme. One that lets you know, hey, we're doing something new if it's not very obvious. And then just something that breaks it up and makes it kind of funny. Who doesn't love a good Office Space meme? So, importance here. Okay, why would you want to build a custom function? Well, there's several reasons why. One, it can simplify things. If you've ever typed out a formula that stretches more than 3 or 4 lines in the formula bar at the top of Excel, it gets a little bit crazy. It gets tough to troubleshoot and really lose your place. I mean, writing formulas is borderline programming. In some respects, it's even a little tougher than programming. It just depends on how you go about it. So LAMBDA gives you a way to simplify those. And you'll see what I mean in a few moments when we do some examples where we can take something really long and you can kind of put it together, just make it more simple. Reusability. Now, this one I think is absolutely huge. When you build a LAMBDA, so if you have a formula that's, again, 3 or 4 or 5 lines long or maybe longer, and you simplify that and you give it a name and you put the parameters in place, you can reuse that all throughout your workbook and not have to type out that same formula or copy and paste and maybe mix up the references a little bit. The other thing is you can reuse it in other workbooks. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of ways how you can do that. There's a long way, there's a copy and paste way, and then there's another way. And then you can also share those with your colleagues. So if there's a specific way that you're calculating something like a KPI or a metric of some sort, you can reuse that, share that with your colleagues. Updatability. Now, if you had a long formula and there was some change to that, there was some parameter or something needed to be linked in a different way, or you need to change how it's calculated in some way, you'd have to go through your entire workbook and update all the different places that it is being used. With LAMBDA, you have a central place that you can update the guts of the formula, what it really means, and it will be refreshed all throughout your workbook. So updatability becomes much, much easier when you take this approach. It also makes them very consistent. And a lot of accountants will tell you, and others, that consistency is sometimes as important, if not more, than accuracy. Spillability. Now, if you don't know what spilling is in Excel, this came out at the same time that LAMBDA did about 5 years ago, almost probably 6 now, actually. Gives you the ability to take a formula and then spill multiple results down, across, or both. That is something that if you don't know what that is, it's based on dynamic array functions. Okay, so relatively new. A lot of times people are calling them DAFs. There are about 30 of them out there that will naturally spill. A lot of the ones legacy, like even like some and some others, will automatically spill if you set the parameters right. Basically, where you would normally say equals A2 plus A or B2, you would put a range of cells instead of just the one, and then it can calculate that across those. That's a very simple approach. There's some more connotations to it, but it allows you to put all the guts in one place and then spill all over the place. And you'll see that with a couple of these examples that I'm going to use. Not just for LAMBDA, this is an approach you absolutely should be taking in a lot of ways. And toward the end, I'm going to actually share you a trick that I'm going to be writing a blog article about for the month of January that I think is pretty cool. I'll give you a little hint. It's called putting the formula in the header. You might be like, why would you do that? Well, just wait and you will see. Shareability. So I mentioned you can share these with your colleagues so that your effort can be reused over and over again. That's exactly what I'm trying to do with this session and the example workbook and the series I'll be doing all next year. You can do recursion. So if you need the formula to call itself to do something like a factorial calculation, LAMBDA does support that. And there's really no other way to do it that I have found yet other than with LAMBDA. And then with security. Now I'm going to have to go back to my notes because I can't remember what I was thinking with security here. Okay, that's right. Because of the need not to use VBA and macros. So some people have security concerns with that. This allows you to use custom functions without needing to use VBA. And that does solve some security issues that people do have. So there's the why behind it. And I'll build on this as we go through these examples that we have. Okay. Now, when it comes from making things simple, if you have a formula like this, where we're going to calculate the end of the quarter for a given date, this is very similar to what I've done many times. Now, there's other ways to simplify this now than probably 5 years ago. Using ifs with an S on the end is one way. But think about this for a second. Okay, it takes your brain just a little bit to understand what's going on here. What if it was as simple as this? Giving it a name, giving it one argument, maybe you have 2 or 3 parameters, arguments, whatever. What if it was that simple? Okay, so I'm going to go back. Here's kind of the complex. And I know there's many, many much more complex formulas you could do, trying to make it easy for anybody to understand. And then we take it to this, and we can get the same result. So this right here is defined as that same formula from before. And we'll see a more proper definition in a minute, but that's basically what this one means. Simplicity is one of the most beautiful parts of using LAMBDA. Now, the syntax that you're going to have for LAMBDA, it is its own function in Excel. So if you just start typing and you have a version of Excel from within the last 6 years equals LAMB, you're going to see it pop up, right? By itself, doesn't really do a lot. Okay, it doesn't. It's meant to perform custom calculations. It is also meant to be used as a helper function within a lot of other dynamic array functions. But what you would do is give yourself one or more parameters. Now, you don't have to. That's why they're in the square brackets here. They're optional. And you can have a whole bunch. I believe you can have like 256 or something. I've never needed more than like 5. So if you're using more than 5 parameters, there's probably a way to further simplify it, but you might have your reason. The last thing which is required is that calculation. There has to be something at the very end for it to calculate. And the idea is to use those parameters within the calculation. That's the whole idea of doing this as a custom function. Okay, so you can have option. Okay, 253. I knew I had it in here somewhere. So those are optional inputs. So they're basically variables you can use Could be cell references, could be numbers, text strings. So it could be a reference or it could be some constant or static value. And then the calculation is required some kind of logic. It could be a combination of a whole bunch of other functions, some ifs, if, or whatever else that you have, and it has to be the last argument. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're thinking about building some of these or using them and troubleshooting them. The naming, it's got to start with a letter or an underscore, and then after that, it can contain numbers, and it cannot be the same as any cell reference. So you can't just call it A1. Now, if you've used named ranges before in Excel, these work very, very similar. You're just not naming a range, you're naming a formula or a function. Okay, so we'll look at that as an example as well. Just kind of it lives in the same place. How you actually would build one of these. Now, when you add one, okay, and this is meant to be a takeaway, so you'll have access to the copy of the slides here in case you want to use this. This is probably one of the better reference ones in here. You would go up to the formulas ribbon tab. Okay, so first step, click on that. Then you'll see all the wonderful formula type things here. And then hit name manager. Same place you'd go to edit or add or delete your named ranges. And then click new. What you're going to want to do is add a name. I like to start mine with L underscore. That way you know it's a custom Lambda function. You can do whatever approach you want, but I find that helps in a couple of ways. One, you know it's Lambda, right? So when you start typing, you've added these to your workbook. You start typing, you put L underscore, only your Lambdas will show up. That's with intention. It makes them easy to find. The other thing is one of the tools that I use, one of the custom tools that I built, if you add Lambdas to a workbook and you set a prefix like L underscore, it will automatically add them to a library in the background. They'll be available all the time. Okay, that's a pretty cool hack. We'll look at that later, but that's the reason for the naming there. And if it's one that is not meant to be reused, that's just like specific to that workbook, then I do something else like LS underscore. Whatever approach you take, I recommend be consistent. Don't give it like a super long name because remember, you have to type these things out, but give it a name that is logical enough that it makes sense. Like you could probably guess what this one means, L underscore BO month. Well, if you know anything about the EO month, end of month function, this is just basically me calculating what the beginning should be. Okay, give it a comment. I highly recommend documenting with comment. That's optional, but I highly recommend using that because then it's very obvious. And again, this is something else that puts itself into the little search box I use when I run Lambdas. So it's just helpful because I've got a bunch of them now, like 80 something. Some of them are very similar. Make sure you use the right one. And then down there in the refers to box is where you're going to put the calculation. Okay, so it always starts with equals Lambda, and then you're opening parentheses and whatever arguments or parameters you have. And then the last, after that last comma, unless you start putting in some parentheses, is your calculation. Going back to that syntax we just covered. Okay, so what this is doing is saying, hey, you're going to provide the start date, the number of months, and then it's going to calculate the end of month. Okay, just as if you were doing the end of the month, and we're going to take away one. We're going to just add one day to the very beginning. It's basically calculating end of month for the previous month and then adding one day. Pretty simple, right? But would you want to calculate like all this stuff, or would you just want to calculate that? It's really the question that you're asking yourself. In some cases, does it make a whole lot of sense to build these? Maybe, maybe not. In some cases, you're like, why not? I've got all these others. I'm just kind of completing the library or the number of them out. So that's how you're going to build one. So once you're done, you'd click OK. And then it's in that workbook. Okay, so if you go open up another blank workbook, you're not going to see these in there. You're going to have to somehow get the Lambda in there, copy and paste or other options. Okay. Now, before we look at some examples, we work with this a little bit in Excel. Let me, we'll do another poll just for keep the CPE people happy. How do you think the Lambda function would best help you? So if you've used a QR code and you're doing that, just press refresh, or it should come up automatically. And this isn't just for CPE. You can just respond if you want to. Really doesn't matter. You know, there's another option I kind of want to add to this personally. I'm all about efficiency, so I'm picking option B myself. The other thing I think is reusing. I think that kind of fits a few of these different things. Probably B is the best one for reusability. My mindset from an efficiency approach is think once, apply often, and refine when necessary. And Lambda is an awesome tool for doing that. because you make that really little change in one place. Like if that BO month we just looked at, if we wanted to change that, how that's calculated just a little bit, we do it in one place in the name range manager, and then anywhere we use it, it just automatically updates. If you don't use cell styles, very, very similar approach, but from a formatting standpoint. So that's another note to maybe write down. If you're like spending a lot of time on formatting, it's inconsistent, then that's another thing I often teach about. And to be honest, I don't use them enough. I need to use them more, but bad habits are tough to break. Anyway, so I think everybody's had a chance to look at this one. To move on into the example section. I'm a big fan of the Willy Wonka memes that are out there. We used one the other day. It's great. Just kind of almost triggered me a little bit back to my past. So look at a few examples here. Okay. Here's our first one. We just kind of looked at this one. Okay. So we're going to calculate the beginning of the month. Very, very simple, but this is what the definition looks like. And the reason I like to show it here like this is when you're building these out, you can build in line breaks to help understand what's going on. And you can build in the indentation very much like programmers do when they're programming with code. Okay. When I troubleshoot, I'll either use TextPad. There's an add-in I'm going to show you at the end that Microsoft put out there called Excel Labs, I believe is what it's called. It will automatically indent for you as well. It's just because it's on the side of the screen. I don't love some of the ways that it displays that. So if I have a whole bunch of lines, I'll often put it in Notepad. But this is what one would look like. Now I'm going to hop over into Excel to demonstrate this exact one that we are looking at. Okay. Now, again, formulas, name manager. Okay, so this is where your names are going to be not just the formulas, but if let's say we're going to add a name right here. So let's say that this is, whoa, my number lock went away. Let's fix that problem. Let's say we have some kind of sales figure here. Okay, we're going to say current year sales amount. Okay, if you've never used name ranges before, that is one way to define them. Click your cell, give it a name over here, and then there's two big benefits to that. One, it's going to give you a navigation element. So if you name them very specifically, you just come over here, just notice how it jumped to that cell, okay? So that's one benefit. There's other ways to kind of use navigation like that too. I've got a tool that will do search suggest. So instead of clicking this, imagine having dozens of these. Well, nobody would want to scroll down that list. That's one benefit. The other benefit is you can simplify the way you're referring to things. So instead of saying equals P3, that does still work, right? But you could also use equal, what do we call that? Sales something? Or prior year? Or was it current year? Yeah, there we go. I always forget what I name things. So it doesn't necessarily help from that perspective if you don't know what you're naming things. But notice how we can just refer to it like that and then autocomplete, right? So let me back up here. Equals CY. You see how the autocomplete put this in just as if we were typing a formula, okay? So another reason why it's helpful to do that with named ranges. Now that named range will also pop up right here, just like all these other formulas. Now I've got a couple of them in here, okay? We're going to add one. In fact, let me do a couple of things. I'm going to add some stuff to my clipboard so I don't have to type it all out. Okay, so formulas, name manager, we're going to add one. We're going to call it, notice it's trying to automatically name it based on what's in the cells around it. That can be helpful, often is not helpful. We're going to call this BO month. This scope, we want it to be available in the entire workbook. You could restrict it if you wanted to, but I usually don't. Restrict it to a different sheet. Here's our comment. Again, highly recommend putting comments in because that way you're communicating to yourself and others what it is. And then here is our calculation. Just like you saw in the slide in the example just a moment ago. Now, if it's not a working calculation, just like when you try to press enter for a formula up here, it's going to tell you it's not going to be happy. If it gets you through, then you know you've got a good calculation, okay? So now that we've added that, if we want to put the beginning of the month in here, I'm going to put this in, let's see, I'll copy this part in. We'll type in the BO month part. Because I want you to see, when you start typing L underscore, here are all the Lambda functions I have in this workbook. If you're starting a blank workbook, you're not going to have any. You'll see that in a second. But now you can type with autocomplete. I'm just going to put in those parameters here. The cool thing is that it's going to show you what those are. So if you name those parameters, that's important too, is naming those logically. Well, what's the start date? Okay, that's going to be A8. What's the number of months? B8. Okay, so we can put it in there. Now, I can't remember if I built this one. I don't think I built this one to be spillable. So if we put in A5, 20 here and B20. I don't think it's going to work correctly, but yeah, it's doing something a little bit different. There is a way to make that spillable so that instead of having to drag this down, you can make them all work. I would just need to retool the definition. So this guy right here, just retool it just a little bit so that it would spill appropriately. There's a couple different ways to do that. Now, we've added a function, a custom function in here, used it, referencing cells based on the custom parameters that go into that. What if we want to use it in a different workbook? I'm going to show you one of the basic ways. You saw how to add it the hard way. You know, you go into name manager, name definition, optional comment, and click OK. If you copy a cell that has one of those custom ones in there into another file, okay. Actually, let me back up here for just a moment. I want to show you the before and after. If we go into the name manager now in this blank workbook here, well, darn it. Let's just start over. Didn't mean to go ahead and add that. Brand new workbook, okay? No named ranges here. All we're going to do is copy this. In fact, let's copy all this stuff. That way the calculation will actually give us a result into cell A7. Okay, notice that it does work. It didn't just copy the cells in the formulas, it copied that named range. That's one way to do it. So what I absolutely recommend, and I'll come back to this point in a little bit, is having a Lambda library of all the ones you're going to use and want to reuse all the time, just based on what your normal workload and workload flow is like. Have a library of them, because one of the things you can do is copy and paste them. Okay, so if you have to go like, oh, I made this custom one, I want to use it again, and you don't remember where you put that file, you're going to spend a lot of time looking for it. Studies show that we spend about 1/5 of our time, several hours a week, looking for information like a file or a formula that we used before or whatever. And that's a lot of time, absolutely a lot of time, 400 something hours a year, right? So if you can cut down even a small fraction of that time, that's a huge win. So that's one way to reuse these, is to copy and paste that. I'm going to show you a couple of other ways to do it as well. Now that's our first one, okay? Pretty basic, right? You're like, I can do this. It's easy, especially when you're going to have this workbook to copy and paste from. The second one we're going to look at calculates the date for Easter. Okay, now we're going to start to see where Lambda can be really valuable. I had no idea there was a math calculation for Easter. I thought it was a little bit more, subjective. I didn't realize you just calculate it. But you can, and this is the calculation. So as long as you have a year, so that could be cell like A1 if it has like 2025, you're going to put that in here and here, and then there's all this math that does it. And I'm like, why in the heck is the minute function here? I don't know. I unpacked this to understand it back when I first found this, but since then I've long forgotten that. Just like calculus, which my 17-year-old's been learning and trying to ask me questions like, I don't know. That's why we have AI now. So I named it L_Easter. Here's the definition behind it, and now I can use it. So just to give you an example of how we can do this one I did intentionally build spilling into, okay? Now, this one is not, notice L_Easter is not in here, okay? So I'm going to use another approach to copy this into this workbook, okay? This is a custom tool that I've built, okay? When you have 50, 60, or at this point now I have 80 of these kind of things really, really do help. So I'm running a macro that launches a search box. It does a lot of things. It can run other macros. It can search for files. It can search for sheets or named ranges. And the other thing it can do is search for lambdas. Okay, so you see how it says LA. That's my little shortcut for lambda. All I typed in was EAST. Here's lambda, or here's the Easter lambda. Here's the group it's in. Here's the formula for it, the comments. It looks a lot like that named range manager. Notice some other things over here. When did I make this? Do we want to automatically save lambdas with this prefix so it has some of these other settings and things? Do we want to edit in bulk? I'll show you what that means in a few minutes. And then we want to add this one. So what this is designed to do is once I press enter, if that name right there matches one in my library, it's going to inject it into this workbook without having to go copy and paste it from some other place. And it's based on a library that's saved in the background. Now, even better though, is this one's related to date calculations. I have about a dozen that are similar to that. In this, I'm giving it a group, dates, okay? So there's another checkbox here that's optional to add all those lambdas in one go. And that's what we want here. So as I press OK, if any of those already exist, it's going to say, hey, do you want to override them or do you just not want to? I'm OK overriding those because I know that I've done those a few times. But it didn't just add the Easter one, it added a whole bunch of them, like calculating Thanksgiving and Mother's Day and Father's Day. Or if you just want the one, uncheck that box. It'll just add the one. Okay. Easter was one of the ones that was added. So if we were to take off that apostrophe, I have this kind of ready and waiting for us. Notice it calculates Easter for all of these days. Now, what this is doing, for those of you who don't know what the hashtag right here means, okay, notice that we're referring to cell A2. The hashtag means use the entirety of a spilling array, and it has to be the top. If we were to say A5 or something else, it doesn't work. Okay, it's got to be the top. This itself is a spilling array. If you don't know how to use the sequence function, you absolutely should. Awesome helper function. It does some really, really cool things. I might show you one here in a minute if I remember to. But because this is spilling all these results with just one, notice it kind of gets gray as you go down below. And if you try to type something, you'll get that spilling error in both of those. So it's spilling all this stuff, and we want to refer to all of that as we calculate Easter for several different years. So if you were wondering what it's going to be for the next 4 years, you don't have to Google it. Now you have a way to do it. Pretty cool. So there's Easter. There's another example. Dates are a great way to reuse this. In fact, I do want to show this. I was thinking about maybe doing this later, but I'll show you now. If you wanted to calculate, let's say we have the end of last year. Okay, I just got to remember what I called this because now I have so many that I've forgotten what they're called. I want to do date headers. That's what it's called. Okay, now you see what's kind of cool? As I scroll down here, it gives me that comment, okay, that you can see next to it. That's why those comments are so helpful. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to say we want to have 12 months, and then at date start is optional. Refer to that right there. Okay, I'm just going to turn these into dates, the shortcut I have. Okay, isn't that kind of cool? In fact, let's do this. Let's make it the first one of the year. Forgot, I've got a couple of versions I've used that. These are date headers you can use at the top of a trending spreadsheet or something. In one function that spills, and it's completely dynamic. So if you have an input at the beginning of your workbook for, like, you know, what the year is or something, the entire thing can automatically spill. Or if you're like, hey, and maybe the 12 is linked to its own thing, and you're like, I don't want 12, I want 36 now. Okay, you just need to come over here and change those to be dates. Spilling is one of the coolest things. For somebody who's used Excel for 15 or 16 years until I found out about these, I was like, this is awesome. Would have totally architected my spreadsheets completely differently had we had these available. And this is a big reason why Excel is a big esport. If you don't track that, they did the World Championships a week or so ago in Las Vegas, and that's like the only thing in my social feeds right now. Someday I might have to compete in those. I'm getting a lot of people telling me I should just because of stuff like this. They use heavily this approach to formulas as well as a lot of lambdas that are already available because they know that there's like a case study they need to follow, and they've already kind of done something similar they can reuse. And Lambda gives them a great way to do that. So we've done dates. Let's look at another example, okay? A lot of people use Excel as a checkbox or a task list or something. So what we can do with this, okay, is say what I want to do is as new items are added, I want it to automatically update. And that's what I've done here. So the arguments we have in this one, B2 is the top cell. So that's B2 right here. It's going to start to count from there. And in how many cells, what's the maximum row we might need? I usually put in like 1,000 or something. Okay. So as I press enter, notice it automatically spills based on what we have here. So if I take some off, okay, it automatically spills. There's nothing below. It knows exactly where to stop. You don't have to say equals if blank, then blank. Otherwise, you like do the calculation and then drag that down 1,000 rows or so. I used to do that. Well, you know what that means? A lot of unnecessary calculations. I've had that slow down files a lot because I didn't want to miss the new stuff. With spilling functions like this, you don't have to worry about that. The way I did this one is actually kind of cool because oh, this is not the one. There's another one that I made that will automatically jump over. I should remember what I called it. Equals. It might not be in this one. I might have to add that. Let's see. Let's count. Okay, I didn't add it to this one. I'll have to find it. But it will basically, this one just, it just does a basic count. So if you have no blanks, it doesn't matter, but it doesn't know really kind of how to skip them, right? You see how it's a little bit off there. I've got another one that does. I should have probably updated this file with it, but that is all good. So there's another example of how you can use this more. Doesn't have to be accounting and finance. That's everybody can use Excel as a checklist. I'm going to show you an example in a minute with that kind of new approach I'm taking that kind of sort of does this. In fact, I think that one does have the new version of this in it. Okay. All right. So we're at this. We did this one. We did the list count. What I want you to understand from this, I knew there's a reason to do this particular slide. Notice that this argument has brackets around it. That means it's optional. Okay. Now, if you're going to take that approach, notice we have the top cell is required, then the max row, it's optional. And if it's omitted, we're going to provide something for it. And that just speeds it up for people. Okay. And gives them a default. If you're going to do that, you're going to want to use the is omitted function. I don't know of any other purpose it has other than to check for optional parameters within a Lambda. Okay. Now, we'll come back and talk to let if we have a couple of minutes. That's another really, really crucial helper function that came out when Lambda did. And by itself, it can be really powerful as well. It basically lets you set variables. So here's our max row that's optional. We're basically going to give it a second one and say, we want to use this. And if that one's omitted, okay, which if it's omitted true, then we want to use a default. Otherwise, we're just going to refer back to it. And then we're going to use this B one all throughout the rest of the function. Okay. So this is basically using a combination of offset and the max there to say how far should it go down. The offset, max, and count A. That's kind of the old school approach to spill. The newer approach is to use the dot on the other side of the colon if you're doing a reference. And we might, if I have an example of that, I'll call it out. So that's how this one works. Key thing I want you to take away from this is if you want to use optional parameters or arguments, put brackets around them as you name them, and then use that omitted and use this as an example to make one, right? And just kind of tweak it for what you need. Okay, next one. This one's getting a little bit more intense, but what it can do is create random strings if you want to create like default passwords is one way that I've used this. I actually used that yesterday for it. So what this one is doing, if we go look at it in Excel, a little bit involved in the calculation, but what it's doing, if I take off the apostrophe, so that's kind of waiting, how many characters and how many strings, how many results to spill should they have? Okay, so you see how this is just referring to those two cells. And it just does that. Now this one is dynamic. It's just like using like the random or the date or today. It will update if you continue to calculate somewhere in the workbook. You'd want to copy and paste just the values if you want to keep a specific recalculation. Okay. Now notice this is spilling. You can see this kind of gray as we go down. You can just copy this across and notice here we want a longer number of characters, more strings, and the same thing here. So that linking these all together to parameters or inputs makes it even more valuable, right? So another example there, working with text. This next one is kind of cute and cool. It lets you create a little calendar like the ones you would see if you've ever gotten mail from a company and it has their logo and a cute picture and then just a little rip-off thing. The doctor and the dentist used to do that back in the day. We got one the other day from a remodel company, I think. Whatever. I mean, I don't know who still uses those, but if you want it in Excel, let me show you what it looks like how to do it. But this one has a lot of cool stuff in here. And I do want to take a moment and touch on what let helps you with. I would write this down. If you don't know how to use the let function, I would write this down to learn more about it. It's something I teach about, but there are plenty of great examples. You can even ask AI, hey, what's a let function? Why should I know this? What are the benefits, etc. It lets you simplify and basically create variables that you can reuse. So whether that's hey, here's a date I want to reuse a bunch of times. If you want an entire calculation, like if VLOOKUP of some long formula is this, then this, otherwise return the VLOOKUP. Well, we've just now taken this long string and done it twice. Well, you can throw that into a let variable and just use that once. Or in this case, what it's saying is we want a date, and then we're going to have A, B this, C this, and then we're going to kind of put all this stuff together, CAB, instead of repeating all this really long stuff. Let is awesome. Really, the fact that they pulled all this stuff together and released it at the same time was just like mind-blowing to me. So what does this one do? It's more of a cute thing than anything else, but what we're going to see, I believe this one's already in here. Yep, calendar, so it's right there. It got added with the when we injected the Easter one. If we take out the apostrophe here, notice we're referring to the year value is B1, month value is B2. And look at this, isn't that kind of cool? It creates its own little calendar directly for us. It knows exactly how to place them, just like you'd expect on a calendar that you buy like at the mall or something. And if we change this, let's say we want this month, it's completely dynamic. Now you might not have seen it because I think these months are kind of the same. Let's go back to November, December. So one, the label, we've given it a specific label and how we want that to look. That's what this does, the text function, and a really good one to know if you're going to work with dates and numbers. And then it puts them in all the right boxes. But to do this, you don't have to type this. You just type this. That is why this is so powerful, because it simplifies and it lets you do some really, really cool stuff over and over and over again. Right? So cool. Now we're going to look at one more. This is a big bonus for you. Okay. The next one we're going to look at is by far the most complex one I've ever done. And I absolutely had help from AI. That's going to be one of the tools we talk about later and kind of how you do that. And an example or two. This one lets you unpivot data. What does that mean? Well, if you've ever done a pivot table and you've used a date or a month or years or something, kind of like a trend where there's periods at the top and you got other stuff, that's pivoted. Pivoted format or structure. Okay, it's repeating stuff across the top. Now, a lot of times we're given data in that structure, and instead of it being across this way, we need to stack it up and down, because then we can do filtering, we can do formulas. It makes it, sort and other things. Okay, a lot of data I've gotten out of reporting tools will come out where it's like, here's our chart of accounts, here's the account, here's the entity, and then here's January, February, March, April, May, and it's like that. I was like, well, that's kind of cool from a visibility perspective. Maybe I filter and see them across. But there are plenty of times when I need that to be this way because I need to do some other math on it. And while there are workarounds to work with that structure, it's just not easy. You can't really filter it in the same way. So this next one, just look at this. I intentionally didn't indent it because it would take up more than the slide here, but this entire thing, AI helped me with this. I probably spent 12 plus hours building this one formula. Now, not just building it, but building and refining and testing and refining again and adding it in some more options and stuff, like the header range and some other things. You'll see what I mean in just a moment. You might think that's crazy, 12 hours on a formula. Well, to take the data and restructure it and no other way. And I also have two other ways to do it. You can use Power Query. I've got a macro I've used forever, but I thought this would make it dynamic and almost instant. Right, not have to go grab data, kind of go through the steps and do it, or with the macro, it's not dynamic. So it was just a challenge I gave to myself, and you guys get to share in it. So what does this look like? Okay, like I mentioned, this is literally some data that I've anonymized that came from a report I used to download where it was like this. I've simplified it a little bit. It has two fields or columns that are not repeating. They just go all the way down. And then there are two columns over here that repeat the actual budget. And then we have all the ones for the different year-month. So this actually went out to 12 months. I've abbreviated it just to make it easy to see everything. Okay. And now what we want is to take all this and stack it. Okay. Well, what I've got over here is a formula that can unpivot. I just want to make sure it's in here. L_un. Perfect. It's already in here. So what this is doing, here's what the arguments are in this case. There's a little bit more, so I want to go through these. You're probably starting to get this. What's our data source range? In this case, it's J15, okay, including the headers. That's important for this one, through W235, okay? Here's our next one. How many header rows are there above the data? In this case, there's two. A lot of times it's just one. It's just a month or a year or something. But in this case, there's two, and that's important. You got to get that right. How many header columns are there? In this case, there's also two. There's the account and the description. So basically, where does the data start to change? The source data is everything to the right and below those row headers and those column headers, okay? And then optionally, we can give it an array, and that's what these curly brackets mean. We're supplying an array, and you want to make sure that matches the number of columns that you're going to expect when this thing runs. Or you could give it a range instead. So if you give it a range like A1 through A3 or something, that would be equivalent to putting in hard-coded values within those curly brackets. So what this does when it's done, instantaneously just about, depends how big your file is and all the other stuff going on, but do you see what it did? Let me add a freeze paint so you can see this a little bit better. It stacked this. So in our period here, I'm going to throw on a auto filter. What did that? There we go. Here's all our periods, okay, 1 through 6. And then here's all the amounts, and then it's either actual or budget. So you can flip those rows if you wanted it to sort differently or sort after the fact. It took this structure that's this way and flipped it this way so that then you can do other stuff with it. With one really, really intense formula that you guys don't have to write. You can use the one that I've got in this workbook. That is really, really powerful. And again, the reusability of this and the simplicity of it, I mean, you guys can probably figure out with just me sending you this, what does this really mean? It guides you through it. Well, where's the source data? How many headers? How many, rows, columns? If you don't put anything in here, right? If we don't put anything at all, let me just show you what it does. It just leaves them blank. So if you want to supply headers, the only problem is doing it this way versus a non-dynamic way is you can't really write anything in here. If you do, then it gives you that spill error. Okay. But we put them in there, so we're just going to use them. Super powerful, right? Okay. Now, within Lambda, there are several functions that are often used that I've seen, that I've used myself, that help. Let is definitely one of them. And I've kind of put a summary of some of the popular ones we covered. Is omitted, sequence, I mean, obviously if and stuff like that. Many others. All the dynamic functions, the 30 or so there are helpful here. This QR code goes to a template I have where every one of those dynamic array functions, there's an example, there's gotchas, tips, tricks, explanations, etc. So if you're kind of just now learning those, you can grab that. It's a valuable resource. But these are all valuable. This is kind of summary of the ones I use by far the most that are going to help. There's a reason let's number 1, because I think that's in at least half of the lambdas that I make. Okay. Quick little poll here. If you can hear my dog barking in the background, I apologize. She's going nuts, probably because of, it's that time of year where Amazon stops by probably on a daily basis. I'm going to play along on this one. Absolutely all the time. I use a lot of the same formulas. In fact, before Lambda came, I had a little box where if I had a formula I really liked, I could click save and it saves it to the background. Then I could search for it again later and kind of reuse it. It wasn't quite as easy because then you got to move around the cell references and there's just a little bit more, but at least it was like a shortcut to get back to it. I do still use that sometimes, but I think Lambda, it just makes all these things even easier and better. Now you can continue to respond to that just so we can make sure to get through everything. I'm going to keep going here. Got about 12 minutes left. I made this image quite a while ago before AI got a little bit better about making images. There was a bit of an argument on which was a better approach to make custom functions. I still think Lambda is the best because it's the most approachable, but I have dozens of user-defined functions. That's what UDF means, that I still use. So there are reasons why you'd use one or the other, sometimes together. We're going to go through that for just a couple moments. UDFs, okay, they're written in VBA, and you have to have a macro-enabled either file, or maybe you're using your personal workbook or an add-in. But if the other people you're working with don't have that, then it's going to give you an error. It's not going to calculate correctly. We had somebody say, why not use Power Query Friend Pivot? That is a great question. I think part of it is personal preference. Power Query can do it. It takes a little bit to set up. I mean, hopefully you saw, let me go back to Excel, how easily I was just able to enter these parameters anywhere, no matter how many header rows, header columns, and all that stuff like that. You saw how quickly I was able to do that. With Power Query, you're talking about, a few minutes of setup. Now, if you're going to do that same unpivot over and over again, by all means, Power Query is the best bet. For a one-off, I think this or a macro still are. I've got a macro that does it just as quickly. I just highlight the data, press enter, it prompts me for how many rows and columns or headers, and then it's done. It adds it to another sheet. That's not dynamic. So I use all three of those approaches depending on the scenario. So fabulous question. Hopefully that was a helpful answer there. Go back to this slide. So UDFs here, they're stored in a workbook, the personal macro workbook that's always available, or the or an add-in. So doing the same thing, calculating age, a lot of ways to do it. This is what I used way back in the day, so I've kind of just used that as an example. The Lambda approach is here. Again, there are more simple ways to do it. And then the UDF approach is here. So it's using programming things like variables and loops and objects. You have access to those. You have access to system information. And then there's a few other things. At the end of the day, it's a very similar approach. in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. It's just how you get there and some of the flexibility you have. And, some tools and features within Excel can talk to Lambda, but not UDFs, and vice versa. So it's good to know that they're both options. Just kind of a little comparison. I wrote a blog article. That's where that fun, terrible AI image came from. Build your own functions. Well, they both do that. Are they tied to a specific workbook or an add-in? Yes, both of them are. Or the personal macro workbook. Spill natively, Lambdas, absolutely yes. UDFs, not necessarily. Depends on how you write it. Some things like conditional formatting, you cannot inject a UDF into conditional formatting. It's like it doesn't know that they're there. So I've written a couple of really neat conditional formatting helpers. Like one checks to see if there are hard-coded values within a spreadsheet, and it'll highlight them, or even hard-coded parts within the formula. You're like, oh, somebody said calculation +1 for rounding. Well, you don't want to leave that there for long. It'll check for that stuff. So what it does is it refers to a Lambda, which refers to a UDF, because the UDF is what's dissecting all the parts. So you're using both. I mean, very rare that I've had to do that, but sometimes you have to do it. Backward compatible UDFs will do that, and all the things. So just wanted to throw a quick comparison for people who may be familiar with both of them there. All right, last section here, we're going to do tools. Before we do that, have you ever built any of your own? Whether it's Lambda, UDFs, both, or neither, all of these are okay options. I'll go ahead and respond. You probably know the answer to mine. Oh, we have some people who haven't used Lambda yet. I hope your eyes are being opened, and with some of the stuff you're going to be able to get from this session, including the workbook. Hopefully that is helpful. You can continue to respond to that. I'm going to move into the tools section here just so we can get you on the rest of your day. Love this picture. This guy trying to use a bike pump on a giant, tractor or dump truck or something. I mentioned the library that I use. Okay, and the QR code there goes to the library. I actually use it. This is now something that people download, and I do update it every month or two with new ones that I've added or heard of, and like, ooh, that'd be cool. Let me show you what this looks like. So if we're in, I'm just going to go to a new workbook. Okay, so I can use the search box. There's several ways to do it. If I go over here to one of these Lambdas, one of the options that pops up is to edit all the Lambdas in one place. So I click on that. It loads a library. You can delete from here. You can add from here. You can edit from here. You can reorganize from here. You can assign groups. That's one of the main things that I often do with this. And it shows all the ones. This is what's stored in the background and powers that search box. So what date did you add them? You can see I added a couple just a couple of days ago. Oh, I've got duplicates. Let's go ahead and get rid of them. What's the formula? What's the comment behind it? And here's one thing I did not do is I didn't group these. So I will put a group here and do that later. Let's see. Those are statistics. Okay, so I'll do that later on. But this is in the background. So when you run this the first time, it's going to export to whatever workbook you have open, whatever active workbook it is. If this sheet exists in that workbook, then it will process it like it's going to happen here. So it wasn't there, it exported it, and now it is there, and it will work. So I just need to type bulk Lambda. There we go. So it will process this, okay? And it's updating basically a copy of this in the background. And there's a little box that popped up on another screen. Don't know why. Probably because of Teams. It tends to mess with stuff like that. So I've got 78 of these. There's a few more I need to add to this that I haven't done yet from the last couple of days. But that's in the background. And just like you saw there, those last two, the ifs ones, if I was to come over here and say ifs, notice that now this one and this one, these are the two that we just added. And you can tell that because the date matches there. They're now available in that search box. I have not found an easier way to inject Lambdas like that. There's some awesome Excel experts that have some cool tools like that. I'd argue this one is probably 1 or 2 clicks quicker, but at the end of the day, if you're using Lambda, I don't care what you use because it is crucial to use this. Use Lambda just to make it all the benefits we talked about earlier, the simplicity and the reusability and all of that. So that is one tool I use quite a bit. You saw the search box. So that library behind the scenes powers this. You can learn more with the little QR code right there. right? Or if you want to try some of these things out, it's also easy. It's referenced all over my website. Couple more things I want to cover, and then we'll be done here. The library thing, this is kind of redundant. The one thing I forgot to mention here, if you're using this and you're like, hey, I want all of these in one swoop into my workbook, you would just select add here when you rerun it, and it will make any updates, and then it will, any that you put add, it'll add. Forgot to mention that, but hey, that's why that's here. Whether you're using this approach or your own, please keep a library of these. It doesn't have to look exactly like this, but somewhere, maybe you just want to copy and paste. That's fine too. Not quite as quick, might be a little trickier to keep up to date. Remember, the other thing that I'm taking with my approach is, let's see, here's a Lambda, is it's automatically saving in the background. When I save a file, it's checking for anything with that prefix, and it'll add it to this list automatically. That's huge because then you don't forget, right? But use a library, leverage mine, save a lot of time. The other tool that I would recommend using, there's two more. One is the Excel Labs add-in. This is a link that gets you there. This is what it looks like. Okay, so it's got a little box on the right side that pops up. I'm going to go ahead and let's go back to our example workbook. If I come up here, it puts it on your home ribbon tab by default. You can move it around if you want. It will open up. It's a little bit slow to launch, but it will open up and it starts to kind of parse what's in your workbook. Ooh, they've added agent mode in here. That's new. I have not opened this up in a couple of weeks, and that's new. There's the advanced formula environment. That's what you want to use for lambdas. So it'll load them all in there, and notice it's in this active cell. It's got this one right here. Shows you any names that you have. So here's all the lambdas that we have in here. The biggest thing this does is it kind of helps you troubleshoot, and it will do the indentation. So it does it right there in Excel. It can also connect to other sources to download them. I have found that to be really finicky and laggy, so I don't really use that a lot. But at some point, I imagine they will get better. The last thing I'm going to say about this is please use AI. I've got Gemini in here. I'm using Copilot a lot more because my day job, they provide a full Copilot license. And so I'll ask it things like this. Write me a custom function that can do this many parameters. Give it some example data if you want. Like basically give it as much background as you possibly can. And just know that it may not be right the very first time. In my experience, it's 80-20 rule. It's right, exactly right 80% of the time. What I would also recommend, I don't have it on the screenshot, is it will unpack it and explain it to you. Please don't dismiss that. Learn as you go. AI is, I think the best part about it is it absolutely expedites our learning. If I had this back in the day, I would have spent a lot less time Googling. And when I asked my dad about that, how did he get by? He's like, well, I spent a lot of time in a library. I can just, it's getting easier and easier and easier to learn, which means it's easier for everybody else to learn, which makes it tougher on all of us to kind of compete for resources, I guess. So use AI, stress test it, use it to learn, and then speed up the process of writing these things. All right, if you guys have any questions about any of this, please put them in the Q&A. You've been doing that a little bit so far, so please keep that going. While that's going, I'll put some key takeaways, and we've got one last little poll for anybody who needs CPE. What is Lambda? Well, it lets you write custom functions, reuse them, save time, reduce errors. Use the examples in here to build your own, copy and paste from them, tweak them a little bit, use them to spur your own creativity. Leverage the optional and required parameters. That's the biggest part about this. Without this, it's like, it's not the biggest deal, but the fact that you can put in parameters, custom parameters for each one of your lambdas that's what makes them so powerful. If it matters, remember the differences in Lambda and UDFs. I think 95% of the time, Lambda will do what you need it to. And then use tools like the ones I've demonstrated the last few minutes to make them even easier to rebuild and use. Because if you don't really use it, or if you use it once and forget about it and don't use it again when you should or could, it doesn't do you a whole lot of, it doesn't help you as much. So there's your key takeaways. This is the most important poll in this session. Did you learn something new today? What I aim for is no C's. I was always an A, sometimes a B student in school. So that's basically the results I tend to see in a lot of sessions like these. So far straight A's. It used to say the count at the bottom. I don't know why they stopped doing that, but whatever. At some point, I'm going to inject these polls directly into Teams. It'll be easier to report on for sure. But for now, this is what I got. I've got probably 1,000 or so different polling questions for different classes in there. So that's going to be a lot of work to move it at some point. Y'all can continue to respond to that, but we are done for this session. If you enjoyed this, you find it helpful, I would appreciate your support, just spreading the word that I do this kind of stuff. I'm going to try to do one or so of these each month, maybe once every quarter, just kind of depends on how crazy life gets. I've got a lot of awesome Excel tools like the ones you saw today, course training, do a little bit of productivity coaching, and then I help people with projects where they need to automate stuff, and this is often a part of that solution. And I've got, all the different resources available to you at the bottom. So if you like this, the biggest thing that's most relevant is that LAMBDA library I just showed you. That's one of the templates on my website. It's just a few bucks, has almost 80 of them now. Learn from or steal the work that I've already done. Well, not really stealing. I guess you're kind of paying for it a little bit, but that's what helps me support sessions like these, website, hosting fees, grant CP, all the things. But aside from that, we are done. Thank you so much for joining. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a very Merry Christmas. And if you need anything, you know where to find me. I'm on social, happy to help. And yeah, thank you so much for your support. I will end the event now, and this will be posted out there. So if you need to replay it, you absolutely can. So thank you so much, guys. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.